today we are having a candidate forum. This is the second part of TCAC's effort to reach out to the community and bring them in contact with the voters for this year's City Commission Seat election. Last month we held a community forum where we invited members of the community to join us. We had discussions around a handful of topics. We took those answers and the feelings and concerns of the community, turned those into questions, and we will present those to the commissioners here today, or candidates today. So we had to make a little adjustments on the fly. We were going to break this up into two discussions, one for seat 1 and one for seat 2. But Bernard Stevens, who was going to be here for seat 2, is not able to join us today. So instead of doing a solo interview with Ms. Johnson, as fun as it might be, in the interest of time, we decided we would just merge it all into one and just give everybody the opportunity to go here. So the candidates we have, Jack Porter and Lewis Gilbert running for seat 1. Jack Porter is our incumbent and Lewis Gilbert is the challenger, and Dorothy Iman-Johnson is our challenger for seat 2. We did not get a response from City Commissioner Curtis Richardson to join us here today. So we'll start with introductions. We'll just give everybody a couple minutes to introduce themselves and some basics about their platform, and then we'll move into the questions. We'll give about 5 to 8 minutes per question, and then we have 7 areas or 7 topics to discuss with 1 to 2 questions each, and we will just move through these nice and easy. Okay. So we'll start with you, Jack. If you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. I've seen several of you before, and we've met at commission meetings and in the community. I am Commissioner Jack Porter, and I'm running today for the same reasons I ran 4 years ago, and that's to bring neighborhood voices and working people voices to City Hall. I think that it was an amazing time in 2020, the way the community really came together to defeat the status quo, to defeat the establishment with a campaign that was truly powered by people. I was 26 at the time, a relative unknown in the political sphere, but we were able to tap into what everyday people really felt, which was that they deserved better, that the city could do better, and that our taxpayer dollars should go to the benefit of all people. And I'm proud of my record ever since, being on the ground for fighting for low income and affordable housing, making sure that people have access to legal recourse if they are undergoing or under threat of an eviction. We had our office out there literally monitoring every eviction that was filed in the court and going door to door to those people to make sure that they knew that they had legal services options for them. I have voted, I was very proud to vote against the $27 million giveaway to Joe Campbell Stadium. I thought that, we are going to be facing the consequences of that decision for decades to come. Public dollars should be used for public benefit, and we all know that there were so many, countless better ways that that money could have been spent. I've also been vocal about the need for accountability in our city management and our city government at large, whether it's civilian oversight of the police, whether it's, in my view, the need to fire our city manager, the need to, these are just real conversations that need to be had, that we do have and that I'm not afraid to have. I was proud to support the resolution affirming reproductive freedom, and that being a right that we need to protect, and that I believe is a local issue. As long as there are people who live in Tallahassee who require health care, then that will be a local issue. So I'm also proud of my record in working with people in the community, meeting with people. I think that's a huge part of our work that happens behind the scenes, but that kind of constituent services, getting back to people, whether it's, my trash wasn't picked up, or, I'm about to be evicted, or I've been living on the streets for 6 weeks with my kids. My office has always made those issues a priority. And I look forward to this discussion. discussion that we're going to have today and to 4 more years serving the people in Tallahassee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Gilbert. I've been a resident of Tallahassee for 25 years now. I'm originally from Miami, the son of Honduran immigrants who came here in the 60s amongst very tumultuous time here in the country. And they have 5 of us, and I'm the youngest of the group. Came up here to attend FSU, did my bachelor's and master's at FSU, and just recently finished my PhD at Florida University. Career-wise, I've been in student services, student affairs for 19 years between TCAC, excuse me, and at FAMU, working with academic advising, college access for first-gen low-income populations, and my current role as Director of Military and Veteran Affairs, and the TRIO Educational Opportunity Center program, which helps adult learners who want to go back to school during the GED, bachelor's, or associate's degree. So I am definitely not running because for the money or because I enjoy my job, so I have to balance those 2 things. And so, but nonetheless, I have a heart for Tallahassee and the people all over the city of Tallahassee. I believe that my voice is a balanced voice. I am not, I've worked in so many different sectors of this community, and I've lived the experiences of some of these individuals that we are working with every day. From the homeless, well, I've never been homeless, but sometimes I felt like it. But I've worked with homeless individuals all the way to people who have access to capital and things of that sort. So I believe that balance is very important in the current climate that we have in our city commission. And I just believe in listening to the voices of all people and making sure that if there's compromise that is available, let's try to meet somewhere. And it may not be in the middle, but it may be somewhere. And so, again, I've served in different areas. Currently, I'm on the board of directors for Big Bang Cares. And I'm proud that when I was board president, we decided to open up CarePoint, which is the newest healthcare facility on the south side. And I'm also the board of directors for Career Source Capital Region. I don't do anything for a resume. I believe that everything I do has a purpose. And I decided to run because I just believe that there are just voices that are left out of the city hall, issues that are left out for those hot button topics. There needs to be more conversation about human trafficking, sex trafficking. I'm an Uber driver on the side, so I see some of this stuff firsthand, and I'm having questions and wondering how can we do better as a community with reaching and mitigating some of these issues. So we'll talk more about all of these things during the time, but again, I have a passion for Tallahassee. I love this community. I've been married to Gilbert for 11 years now, and Tallahassee's home, and I've enjoyed it and enjoyed my experience here and want to continue to serve as a representative of all people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Iman-Johnson, and I'm running for City Commission Seat 2. And a little bit about my background. A lot of the history that you read about in books happens to be part of my lived experiences. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, was in the children's movement with Reverend Martin Luther King and Shuttlesworth, and was there when the Dogs and Hoses were released on middle school and high school kids, and was there when the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed, killing 4 little girls and injuring many, many more that people never heard about, that disabled them to this day. I have been, in my first year of college, was the year that the Voting Rights Act was passed, and I came home to Birmingham my first summer to register voters, much like Swarner, Cheney, and Goodman did in Mississippi Mississippi and were killed for it. I have been working in the field for civil rights and liberal causes all of my life because I was the recipient of many of those bad things that were happening to people back then. My mom voted for the first time and my dad voted for the first time after the Voting Rights Act was passed. And Birmingham was considered bombing ham because anybody who got involved in the movement, there was the risk that their home would be bombed. There was people talk about injustice now. Black people back then had no protections, none at all. When the freedom buses were stopped and fire bombs were thrown onto the bus to get people off, and then they were beaten with clubs and bats. Police were standing there watching and did nothing. We had no protections back then. And I want to take a minute just to set the stage for how I got to be the Iman-Johnson I am today. My background is in teaching and education. I was a teacher for 28 years, and as a child, I was one of 14 children born to my parents. I was the 5th. So I was the big girl who took care of the younger ones in my family. And my mom brought us up to feel that our reason for being here was more than for ourselves, that we were here to do good for others. And as a teacher, I'm very proud of those 28 years. While teaching, I was the first Black female elected to the Tallahassee City Commission in the history of this city, and the first to serve 2 terms as mayor. During my time as mayor, it was also a time when women's health clinics were being bombed. Doctors and staff for those clinics were being threatened and murdered. And here in Tallahassee, there was a lot of fear, and I made sure that the police department created a perimeter around those health centers so that the people who needed those services felt safe going there, and made sure demonstrators were kept a certain distance away from them. I have a long history of achievements from my previous time on the City Commission. The Smith Williams Center, that's over in this part of town, is there because I found the funding source to get it built when the staff was saying it had to be put off 10 to 15 years in the future. The Greenwood Cemetery, which was overgrown, you didn't even know it was a cemetery. I created the citywide movement to make sure that that was restored and added to the city maintained cemeteries. The Clayman Plaza that you see downtown would not exist if I, as mayor, had not stepped in and negotiated the purchase of the final piece of property on that site. And most of you are too young to know that it was also a brownfield, because there was a dry cleaner on that site that had been purchased, and the fluids had leached into the soil, threatening the groundwater and creating major pollution. And DEP and EPA came in and put a stop work order on that project.
If I can, I mean, I appreciate you going over your history, but if we could just.
Okay,
yeah,
I'll
just
wrap it up.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was able to negotiate the terms of that mitigation plan. I am very happy to be here to answer your questions and talk to you today. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you all for your introductions. So the structure of this is we have 7 topics to discuss with, like I said, 1 to 2 questions per. We'll have 5 minutes for each person to respond, and I'll just let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining. Just as a reminder for the folks here and the folks watching, TCAC or Tallahassee Community Action Committee as a nonprofit does not actually endorse political candidates. We're not allowed to, but we endorse or encourage them to endorse our platforms. So with all of that out of the way, we will move into our first topic of discussion, which is civilian oversight and community control. So our first question is, what are your thoughts on the recent Calvin Riley case, where Calvin Riley was found guilty of DUI despite video evidence showing Officer Kirsten Oliver opening a sealed bottle of liquor from inside of his car, pouring it out, and then throwing it back into his car, which was used as a pretext for further investigation. What are your thoughts on the response from the Tallahassee Police Department, Police Chief Lawrence Rebel, to the leaked video evidence and the treatment of the Riley family? So we'll start with Jack.
Thank you for the question. And to clarify, it's 5 minutes per, like you're gonna
Yes,
follow
yeah.
up? Okay, so we're just addressing the first. I was vocal about my concerns about the incident itself was disturbing to watch. The response from TPD was perhaps even more, just as disturbing, if not more, because we need to make sure we entrust our police chief, in theory, with accountability within his department. And if we can't count on that, then I don't know what we have. You know, disregarding and dismissing what were incredibly valid concerns from hundreds of people at least that I saw personally on social media and emails that I received in my office, I don't think that the appropriate response is to tell people that they're just wrong and they don't have reason to be concerned. I think we need to, in every instance like this, conduct an internal investigation and at the very least make it incredibly clear that we don't stand ever for evidence tampering or any kind of mistreatment in the field. So it was incredibly disturbing, and I shared, and I feel this to this day. I think the behavior of our police chief is setting us back. It's not making us safe. It's degrading the trust. It's harmful to the community, and it's harmful to our law enforcement officers as well. I don't personally feel safe knowing that Chief Rebel is our chief. He has made disparaging comments about me personally as a commissioner, someone who's been duly elected by the public. He's made disparaging comments about other commissioners and members of the public. I find that to be totally unacceptable, And I have supported, and it is for that reason that I have supported a citizen police review board. I supported a resolution that would affirm our commitment to accountability and oversight, and I stand by that to this day. It's unfortunate that the state has preempted that, like they have preempted so many important things that the city has taken action on and that the city needs. And you know, I've also suggested that we look into an appointed police chief, because right now there is no accountability. The chain of command is the chief of police reporting to the deputy city manager, who reports to the city manager, who reports to the city commission. I just think that's too many middlemen for something that's as important as our chief of police. So I found it to be incredibly disturbing, and I was heartened, frankly, by what I saw as an example of what this could have looked like, or what accountability does look like, very recently with what we saw in the sheriff's office. There was a sheriff's deputy who used violence against an inmate, and that person was fired. And when someone missteps, when someone violates policy, that's what you do. And I commend our sheriff for taking that action. I think that's how we restore trust, and that's how we keep each other safe.
Similar to what Commissioner Porter said, you know, the video was disturbing, to say the least. But I think that the response is just as important. You know, if somebody's driving drunk, I mean, you can't dismiss the fact that that's what's happening, right? But I live an experience that some of you may or may not live, but, well, if you're an African American male, you know, regardless of whether I am driving in a suit and everything is working on my car, I still have somewhat of a fear, you know, when I'm driving and I'm going to get pulled over. And I could be going the speed limit, it doesn't matter, you know. And that's the kind of culture that has been created nationally among police. And I know some incredible police officers, and I believe that TPD and the Sheriff's Office has some incredibly hardworking police officers. That's why I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're dealing with leadership here, right? And so, but leadership creates a culture. And if precedence has caused mistrust, then even if whatever the officer did was protocol or whatever they were trying to say it was, you may find a different response from the public. You know, if you have a reputation of trust. So I think that the TPD leadership needs to work on building a reputation of trust. And this is why I support return to community policing, because of the fact that if you drive by, or if I drive by you, what is my feeling? Is my feeling that, hey, that's just an officer there, he's here to protect us? Or is my feeling that, okay, what did I do wrong? And oftentimes for people of color, particularly, it is the feeling of, oh, what did I do wrong? Right? Even if nothing's going on wrong. And if you're doing wrong, just don't do that. You know, and so nonetheless, I think that we do need to examine our leadership and be mindful, you know, when we have people in these respective positions, they need to understand, even if they're appointed by the city commission or appointed by the city manager, they're still accountable to the public. And so we have a lot of issues centered around that, our police station, et cetera, that really need to have a harder look. And but to me, it's all about us having that dialogue and creating an environment of trust, so that if something was done out of protocol, we can respect that versus that being part of a culture, seemingly being a part of a culture of a corrupt organization.
First of all, there are two distinct agencies that have to be looked at on this, the state attorney and the police department and the city. The video made it clear that the arrest was suspect, and that should have been taken into consideration in the trial with Mr. Riley, and whether or not he was even charged in the first place because it was questionable whether it was a legitimate arrest. But that is in the bailiwick of the state attorney. The part that the city would have control over is the police involvement. And I clearly feel, and stated as much publicly at the press conference on the Riley issue, that Officer Oliver should have received some kind of disciplinary action for her participation in this whole situation. I was the executive director of an agency with offices in 8 different counties. And we had a personnel policy that covered all kinds of misconduct. And if the police department didn't feel her conduct was justifiable for firing, there are any number of disciplinary actions that could have taken place in between that, from warning, a disciplinary action in the personnel file, a suspension for a certain period of time without pay. It was any number of actions they could have taken. And I was appalled that the city and the police department did absolutely nothing, as if her behavior was justified, and it wasn't. So I don't know if I would go as far as an appointed police chief, because you can get an appointed police chief who is as bad as the police chief that answers to a city manager who is bad. You need good management, period, up and down the organization. And before I finish, I need to point out, because people might not know, Reese Gold has the chief of police. Did any of you know the chief of police retired? Raise your hand if you did. The chief of police retired at the end of last year, and Reese Gold created a special OPS executive classification that he just slid the chief into. And when I asked for a public records request to make sure the facts were correct, the answer I got back was, well, it wasn't really a retirement because he was put into this position. Well, the chief of police is now drawing full retirement benefits from the state. And you can't draw full retirement benefits unless you retire. And DROP program states that after your 5 years in DROP, you cannot take another position for 5 to 6 months afterwards, even with the previous employer. So I'm closing this answer by saying your chief is now earning $92,000 a year in full retirement, and Reese is now paying him, in addition, $225,000 in his new OPS position. So he is earning about $18,000 a month, which is more than he made before he, quote, retired.
Oh, wow.
Okay. All right, well,
It's good to know.
I'm just sort of taken aback by that. Okay, well, on the topic of the police chief, moving into our second question on civilian oversight and community control. The appointment of Police Chief Rebel was controversial since his swearing-in ceremony. Working with war criminal Eddie Gallagher, speaking at an event with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, an anti-LGBTQ organization that fights for repressive legislation all over the world, while wearing TPD shirt with the TPD logo on it, and then presiding over 4 killings within the first 5 months of his time as chief, are just some of the examples of his conduct that's created tension with City of Tallahassee commissioners as well as the community at large. So if you are elected, how do you intend to hold the police chief, just period, that position? How do you plan to hold them accountable? We'll start with Mr. Gilbert first this time.
So, when you're in such a key position of leadership, you have to understand, to whom much is given, much is required, right? I, as a director of a program, I may want to go out to the bar, and hang out and do certain things, but I have to be mindful of my role and what that represents, Even as a person of faith, I have to be mindful where I go and what that represents. So I don't agree with the police chief, going to conferences and things of that sort. Particularly, he has a freedom of speech. That's his prerogative, right? And we all have the freedom to believe what we believe, whether we feel it's right or wrong. But when you do that under the banner of your position, that's where I have an issue. Because you're saying that I represent the opinions of the entire police department or the city of Tallahassee. Again, right or wrong, how you feel, it's wrong. The action is wrong when you are actually in your in your work uniform. Even as campaigning, I'm mindful. I don't wear FAMU, my department's paraphernalia, or any of that sort, because I don't want to give the endorsement, the look that the university is endorsing me as a candidate. And that's something you call integrity. And unfortunately, that's a lost art in our politics these days, where people are acting with integrity. And so the police chief has had a number of missteps that I think that the right thing to do is for finding ways to bring the community together, not continue to say, well, I have the right to do what I do, my position, and if you don't like it, so what, right? It's also our city's responsibility to also reevaluate that continuously to make sure that there are no violations of policy. And if there's not a policy in place, there needs to be a policy in place, period. I can't tell you I'm largely educated about Eddie Gallagher and those things of that sort. I'm not going to profess to know that, but just in general, you have to, like I said, leading my first comment, you have to be mindful of who you are associated with. You want that salary, you want that position, you want that notoriety, then you lose a degree of privacy. And if you don't want to lose that, then you don't be in a position. Don't run for office if you don't want to have to deal with that sacrifice. Again, these individuals have a right to go where they want to go and speak where they want to speak, but not as a representative of their official capacity. And because that creates the ideology. But even so, even without TPD represented, you have to be a person that people feel safe with, and they feel safe about that they're protected in this community. And if you're on a crusade, and you're speaking these things out of your mouth, then that creates an issue with the people that you are serving. If you were speaking about African Americans or Latinos or immigrants any kind of way, that would create tension. And I think leaders need to understand that, and that's what we see a lot in our national politics, where people just say whatever they want to say, but then they say they're all about unity and things that sort, which is a farce. So I think that in his evaluation, these things need to be a factor. Is crime going down? Are we feeling safer as a city? If we did a survey across the city of how people feel with the police department, how they're doing, if it continues to feel, if people of color, LGBTQ population feels harassed in any kind of way continuously, that's a problem, and it has to be mitigated. And because of this anti-DEI climate that we're in, you know, unfortunately, law enforcement falls into that, oh, well, we don't have to do it, so we're not gonna do it. And that doesn't mean that doesn't make it right. So we have to hold them accountable for these things, because at the end of the day, the people are the ones that you're affecting. And if they don't feel safe in this community, then there's an issue with the job that you're doing.
The police department has become a political pawn of the city manager, the mayor, and 2 of the city commissioners. The chief does what he knows those 3 commissioners want and the city manager want. He has no authority to act without their consent. So whatever he is doing, know that it's from the top. And if you don't fix it at the top, nothing changes. My husband, Reverend Lee Johnson, served on the committee, the search committee for the police chief. His recommendation was for Chief Gilbert. And the majority of that committee voted for Chief Gilbert. Reese Gold, in negotiating a contract for Gilbert, made it so difficult that Gilbert withdrew his name so that the city manager could appoint his crony, Rebel. This is what you get when you have that kind of situation. And it's not until we address the problem at the top that any of that will change.
I agree with much of what has been said. The question, how do I intend to hold Revel accountable on every single one of these issues listed, I have spoken out publicly, whether it's at a meeting, whether it's hosting a press conference, whether it's on social media, using whatever platform I have to bring attention to these issues and make clear how it is I feel about them. As has been said, he does not report directly to me. The commission does not have the authority to hire and fire him, but that does not mean that there is not accountability. And as has also been pointed out, I believe we have a political problem that can only be fixed with a political solution. And that's going to be a change of leadership at the top and a different city manager. I don't believe that Revel has demonstrated to the public or to me that he has any remorse, any humility, or any openness to change or to reconsider some of the decisions that have been made. And so as far as what that accountability is going to look like, I agree. It's going to have to come from the top, and it's going to have to come from the community as well. And y'all have been a part of that in bringing attention to these issues, because many of them just don't see the light of day. I mean, we're talking about things we know about. Imagine how many things we don't. And that is concerning, and it absolutely needs to change. And in any way that is legal and appropriate for there to be accountability, there needs to be.
Thank you all for those responses. So moving on from civilian oversight and community control, we will now talk about women's rights and reproductive rights. So our first question will be, we'll start with Ms. Johnson this time. What role will you play in fighting against the attacks on women's rights and reproductive rights in Florida, and how would you respond to future anti-abortion legislation?
I will respond the same way I have. I am absolutely opposed to the attack on women's rights, even though the Supreme Court and our dear governor has made it as easy as possible to attack our rights. And I don't say women's rights, I say our rights, because they belong to all of us. And anybody who hasn't seen me at every rally at the Capitol against the bans on our bodies must not have been there because I have been at about every rally. I am a NOW member. I have supported women's rights all the way from the ERA and will work as hard as I can in spite of all the obstacles that have been put in front of us to elect the kind of people who can make change in what's happening. And I want to mention here that while I will fight to the last for our rights, Commissioner Mayor Pro Tem Curtis Richardson, when the resolution came before the City Commission on women's health and choice, he and Diane Williams-Cox were the only ones who voted against it. Even their pal, Daley, voted in opposition to what they were doing. So, you know where he stands, you know where I stand.
Sure, I proudly serve on the board of Planned Parenthood for this region in Florida, Northeast, Southwest, Central, and was proud to support the resolution as well, and have used my platform in every way possible to bring attention to this issue, support to those who need this critical health care. I have spoken at the Capitol, and it certainly feels like an uphill battle, but I am very optimistic that Amendment 4 will pass, and that we can, I know the fight will not end there, but absolutely I'm supportive of that, and I'm supportive of every other measure that we can take that Doc alluded to, whether it's zoning restrictions or noise ordinance enforcements, every way that we can support the clinics that do exist and the people who go to them. So hopefully it won't come to that, but if necessary, I'd be willing to take that action as well.
It's unfortunate that pro-life advocates spend so much time fighting their cause, but very so much time to fight against services for populations while people are on this earth. And so, and then even me as a Christian, I talk to my other Christian friends and I say, we have to look at what's happening across the board. And people spend such an exorbitant amount of time for rallying against abortion, but want to cut social programs when children are born. And so there's the imbalance that you have there, right? And Roe versus Wade, when the Supreme Court overturned it, first of all, I think across the board there needs to be term limits everywhere. When people are in a position for life, that means that 99 years old, they can have 1965 views or whatever, and they can still be in that role, and they have no. That's why this fight is so hard for the Supreme Court and things of that sort. So it's a convoluted issue that we need to look at. But again, as a city commissioner, I would not support anything that limits a woman's right to choose and get the quality health care. I think there are a lot of issues we deal with, and I also think it may not be the most popular thing to say, but if a woman is struggling with the choice to have an abortion, we don't need to take that lightly either. And I do think there are agencies that do provide education for an individual, for a woman who doesn't know what to do, right? Whether it's Planned Parenthood, or it could be the Phi Center or some other places. I know people personally that work there, and people think that they're trying to advocate to stop the abortion, but it really is because of restrictions. They're advocating just, okay, make sure that you have all the information that you need before, but you may still make the choice, and that's your prerogative, right? And so I think totally, in totality, we need to make sure that the funding and the resources are there for a woman that is feeling like, hey, I don't know what to do, that I can get the proper education so that regardless of whatever decision she makes, she is supported. Whether she decides to get an abortion, she's supported, or whether she decides not to get an abortion, she's supported. And you know, of course, as a male, you know, I believe this probably would not be as abundant if more men were stepping up and taking responsibility for the children that they are making. You know, and a woman who is scared because she doesn't have that support, had that support from her partner that helped her create the baby. So it's a very complex issue, but at the end of the day, Roe versus Wade was settled law. And so the fact that we're continuing to go back over it, somebody's making money somewhere. Let's just be clear. You know, on this, you know, somebody's making money. This is a capitalistic society, and so if this issue goes away, somebody loses their income, and that's why people continue to fight. So it's not all about faith and things that's what some people may think. So, but locally, City Commission, I want to continue to provide support for women who and their reproductive rights.
Thank you all. All right, so in the interest of time, just because I know some of our guests here have a 2 o'clock deadline, I'm gonna reduce the time to about 3 minutes total response time, and then we may skip a question or two per one of the questions per topic. So I'm actually just going to move us on to LGBTQ rights. And so our question, starting with Commissioner Porter, is what would you do as City Commissioner to ensure LGBTQ people have equal rights in the city of Tallahassee? What are your ideas on how to help the queer and trans community here specifically?
Thank you, and I'll start really quickly. The other question, what is your plan for making sure there's fair pay for city workers, especially for women? I think city workers need to unionize. I think that's a huge part in that, so I'll just say that really quickly. As far as what we can do to ensure that LGBTQ plus people have equal rights in the city of Tallahassee, again, making sure that there is accountability and training and everything necessary with TPD, for example, in responding to any instance where a member of that community may be involved. There are certain things we can do to make sure that our bathrooms in community centers or all city facilities, they can be gender neutral bathrooms. I mean, there's a million different ways that in small ways, I think we can make people feel more comfortable and safer. I led the charge for the city to have a community ID program, which would assist people of all kinds, but especially people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, whether they want an ID that reflects their identity, whether they are runaways or teen runaways who do not have the documentation they need, but need access to services that they already qualify for, but need that identification. That is another way as well, whether it's programming at our community centers, such as the Palmer Monroe Teen Center. I mean, we could have, and not to conflate these issues entirely, but because this would be, I think, a benefit to everyone in the community, but having mental health providers at our community centers where our children are going, so that they know that there is someone they can talk to if they need to talk to someone. Whether it's someone in our housing department who's making sure that we are connecting people with legal services and monitoring any kinds of unlawful discriminatory acts in housing. And then I think overall, people who are in the LGBTQ plus community want what everyone else wants. They want affordable housing, they want public transit, they want jobs, they want green spaces. And so of course I do think that there are specific things that we can do to address the unique needs of the LGBTQ population, but they will benefit from everything that we do that is in the interest of the public. And so I think that it's important to keep sight of that as well.
I think unfortunately with the attack on DEI, that has given individuals and different agencies were not licensed to ignore any training and things of that sort related to the LGBTQ plus community or communities of difference. Like Commissioner Porter said, individuals who are LGBTQI, that might not be their primary identity. We have multiple identities as individuals. I, as a black man, it's just not, I am a black man, I'm also Hispanic, I'm also an educator. I have multiple identities that are associated. So I think that for the LGBTQ plus community, that's not their sole identity. So making sure that we have quality services, affordable housing, as Commissioner Porter said, and these things helps benefit that community, especially if you find it's a growing population. I think, again, in the public services, we just need to make sure that there are safe spaces, even in education, anything that alludes to a child having to, a teacher having to get consent from a parent, or talk to or out a child if they were to say something about their identity is absolutely ridiculous, okay? Because you are putting that person in danger of retribution, and we can say, oh, we're going to make sure everything is, some of the comments that I made is we're going to make sure that everything is safe. You can't make sure everything's safe when that child goes home, So we have to make sure that we're all working together, city, county, and school board, to make sure that our children are safe, particularly our teens who are in the LGBTQI population that often don't have a strong of a voice. So again, no laws, anything that will restrict or inhibit this population, I would not advocate for that. I think we have a right to be who they are, and they should feel safe. And to go back to policing and everything of that sort, they should feel safe wherever they are in the city and with their identity, being open with their identity.
Put very succinctly, we have federal and state anti-discrimination laws. We should just follow them. We should follow them, and they spell out, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identification, age, and the city of Tallahassee has an obligation to make sure that those laws are being followed, and every department in city government understands from top to bottom that straying from that will not be acceptable.
All right, so moving on to topic 4 is the new police station that is coming up over the old Northwood Mall location. So with the budget increase from the original proposed $60 million to the newly approved $135 million for this police department, citizen concern about the inflated police budget has increased. What will you do to increase transparency around spending for the new police headquarters? And what will you support, or will you support efforts to reallocate funding away from policing towards public services? And I'm going to kind of roll this second question into this. Away from policing with things such as increased militarization and buying equipment that's made to fight war, not to protect communities. So we'll start with
There's a lot you can do with $75 million extra. I think, a lot of the stuff we deal with is economic, and common sense. And I, as a leader, I would feel very uncomfortable coming before people and saying, hey, this, I know we said 60 million, but it just be a little bit more, to the tune of $75 million. And we see that in multiple projects like the airport gateway, et cetera. And you think about the issues that we have that could be resolved or mitigated, like we can have an entirely new homeless shelter, you know, if with that money. So we can never say we don't have enough money. And so I think that, again, you can't, I mean, there's a degree sometimes of inflation that happens, but that needs to be in the contract. You know, okay, for 10%, but you can't go above that. Otherwise, we need to start cutting stuff out. If there's some spa or something going on in there, you know, we need to cut that. We need to cut out the luxuries, because in the end of the day, while I respect our law enforcement and what they do, they don't need luxury. I mean, they're out and about. Like my staff, they're outreach. So our office does not need to have all of the bells and whistles. It just needs to be a place where they can go and do their work. If they need to write a report, etc., in a comfortable space. But the rest of the time, they're out and about. So I would be more interested in using that funding for safer, you know, police vehicles. You know, making sure that the police are safe, you know, when they're out on the street. Public programs, policing programs that bring the police force closer to the community. And yeah, like I said, there's a disregard for that in a sense where we just let contractors come in and say, oh, well, that's what it originally cost, but now it's a lot more. So, and you still have to pay us. And we have to figure that out. So that's, if we don't get, you know, I don't want to use a derogatory term, but if we didn't get the courage, to say, no, I'm sorry, you know, this is not going to happen, you know, and negotiate civilly, you know, some terms, then these things are going to continue to happen over and over. And that's regardless. If you have the power, you know, if you're the majority, or you know, a majority of your fellow commissioners think the same way you do, you can easily do the same thing with any project. So it's really about people really thinking about what is fair. And when it comes, I just think that, yeah, that inflation price is just out of control. We could be doing so much more with that.
Some questions?
Actually, the budget for that police complex increased by $90 million, because the original contract was $40 million. That was pre-COVID. After COVID, staff came back and said, because of all of the problems that have been created during COVID, we need to adjust the budget, the contract, to $60 million. So this $135 million is a second adjustment. And I don't understand who was negotiating with this developer, because usually in an already negotiated contract, you can only do a change order for a certain percentage of the contract. And it certainly isn't 100% of the contract. And so, like I said before, there are people who are in the pocket of the developers, and they get whatever they want at the expense of the rest of us residents. And they pass the bill on to us.
Thank you. You know, a building is not going to keep us safe. Police can respond to crime and investigate crime, but I do not believe that their role ultimately is to prevent crime. I have been very vocally opposed to the increase. I asked for months, along with my colleague, Commissioner Matlow, for updates on the cost of the police station. We know because of COVID and because of the way the world works that something that we were given a $60 million price tag on 6 years ago, whatever it was, would not be the same today. We knew that, which is why we were asking for these updates. And I had to learn like the rest of the public in a story in the news. you know, what this cost increase was. And I would expect management months before then to not only be monitoring this, of course, but letting the commissioners and the public know, because that's the point where you start making decisions about whether we're gonna redirect course or whether we move on with whatever plan we have. You know, the $135 million price tag does not include the, I think, $20 million or more that we've already spent doing just everything that's below the ground, the engineering, you know, all of the demolition. And so we are looking right now, if nothing changes, at a price tag of at least $135 million. And when I raised at our last meeting the question, what are the essentials? You know, I hear about all these community rooms and all these things, but what is the bare minimum that you believe we need? And the mayor frankly interrupted me and said, well, no. Please, I don't think, let me clarify her question. Tell us, like, but this is gonna be a public safety complex. Like, this is gonna be like the Taj Mahal. And I'm like, that is the opposite of what I'm saying. You know, we all in our individual lives make decisions about our finances and what we need and what we want. And there's no reason that we cannot do the same and have an honest conversation about the way this is being budgeted and planned. And that is concerning to me. To the second question about the increasing militarization of our police departments across the country, I have been vocal about my concerns with the lack of transparency with how TPD is using the surveillance that they're collecting. You know, we know how easy it is for there to be the presumption of a crime. I mean, you can use that to justify almost anything as far as the surveillance that we're collecting and how it's being used and who has access to it. When I was first elected, I voted against the Rook and accepting it, and asked that we have a policy for any time we accept something like that we know exactly under what terms it's going to be used. That it's not going to be used against residents at a protest, that maybe we do, let's say we need it for a barricaded person who's being kidnapped and held hostage. Okay, fine, let's have that conversation. And the last thing I'll say is that although these are oftentimes labeled as gifts from the Department of Justice, they cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in maintenance, in buying new trucks to now transport these things. And so there's always a hidden cost that is not revealed to the taxpayers, and that needs to be addressed as well.
Okay. Well, so moving on to our next topic and sticking with finance, we will discuss the city budget. So starting with Ms. Johnson, the city budget has made little to no real increases this year towards public services like transportation or affordable housing, despite raising the police budget by a staggering $9.6 million and approving an 8.5% property tax to fund that increase. How could we improve city spending to better reflect the needs of these citizens and clients?
We could improve it by first making budget workshops, real workshops, where the public is invited in, departments have to open up about what their real needs are, what their needs, their wants, and their dreams are, and let the city commission decide which takes priority. When I was there, we had several budget hearings, budget workshops, where the public got a chance to come in and speak. At the only budget workshop I attended this year, it was staff making presentations on dreams and special projects they wanted to do. There was no opportunity for the public to speak on what they felt the priorities were. And I will tell you that, Wamani, most cities inside the city limits, most neighborhoods don't understand the impact that moving that last phase of Walani up and funding the infrastructure for that have to do with their neighborhoods. Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with your neighborhood, because funding all of those millions and millions and millions of dollars for neighborhoods that won't even be built for about 40 years, where there will be people living in houses that will be contributing to the taxes of Tallahassee. That money comes out of today's taxes. They are spending that money and handing the bill off to people who are paying taxes today and have been paying taxes for decades, and their drainage systems are antiquated. Their transportation systems are antiquated. We can't provide for affordable housing for people who need it, and we are, this is a destruction to our city, where you are doing things for people who don't exist yet instead of reinvesting in infill and infrastructure in existing city neighborhoods.
Okay. Question 2, Commissioner Ford?
So are we answering question 1 and then we'll answer question 2, you
I
think?
think,
Or should I try and blend them?
yeah, we have 2 more
Okay.
topics that only have 1 question, so I think if you
We'll do
can
both.
blend it,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
If you can, just
Okay,
just go
yeah,
make sure we
yeah.
have enough time.
So I definitely think that we need a realignment of priorities, and one of the ways that we can do that, I totally agree, having workshops where actual work is done and where we're having real conversations. Many of you have been to our meetings. We don't even talk about ideas. There's no discussion or debate about policy or options or pros and cons. You can tell that the decisions have almost always been predetermined with, and that unfortunately does not, I think, lead to good outcomes. I wrote my master's thesis on participatory budgeting and how this has been used for decades in some places like Brazil, where I am from, and in other cities and countries in the world. And I think that what you do in instances like that is you start with the assumption that we are going to spend money where our greatest needs are and where our most vulnerable populations live. And that just makes common sense. If you live in a house, for example, and there's a leak in your roof, you're going to fix that leak in your roof before you're going to buy a new couch, for example. And that is something that, unfortunately, we don't even have a real mission about what we're doing here, and so our decisions tend to be so arbitrary. And that is definitely concerning. I also think that a place we can start with that is called base budgeting. And that's where you start from zero and you say, okay, what do we need to really fix this problem? What do we need to address this issue? I mean, I have asked so many times, what would it cost for us to eradicate homelessness in Tallahassee? We don't even have those numbers because we're not asking those questions. And it may be true that we can't afford every single thing that we want, but we are not a poor community as far as resource poor. We do have resources to address many of the issues that we face that would uplift all of us. And there needs to be a more serious discussion of what that is. And what do I think that would look like? I think that would look like building housing, supporting social housing. That would look like investing in our public transit. That would look like hiring social workers to be caseworkers for people who need that assistance, increasing our support for social services. There's any number of things that need more funding and that we know would bring a greater return on our investment and cost the city less money in the long term, in addition to just being what I believe to be the morally right thing to do.
So when it comes to budgeting, and I've managed several budgets, and as much as I wanted to pay people in the past, I have been constricted, you know, based off of the budget that I have been allocated. But then that's when I would have to get creative and figure out how can I make up for the loss or the difference or whatever the case may be to balance the needs of the agency. So with this agency, you talked about the city, and the city has diverse needs. So you have to have a balance of being able to help the least of these, but also have a ability to raise money, and so that you can be able to sustain the comfortable living within the city, and you know, having be a place that people can enjoy living. So, so when it comes to, you know, increasing the budget or making sure that we have sufficient funding, it needs to be a balance of public, private, and grant participation. You know, federal grant or state grant participation. That's just the nature of public. Period. You know, no public entity is going to be funded everything that they want. And you know, to my colleagues here, you know, they have a point. You know, we need to make sure that those who don't have a voice, that we represent those individuals as well. And we don't just represent corporate interests or whatnot. So, you know, like for example, Walani, you know, you don't just approve without saying, hey, you know, what percentage of this is going to be affordable housing? If none of it is affordable housing, then that doesn't make, you know, you have to make these developers come meet you halfway, and so that you can be able to meet the needs of your citizens, rather than listening to the voices of a certain small group that say, no, we don't want that, right? And I think that's what's happening now, because again, when you are elected by or funded by a certain constituency, that constituency is going to hold you accountable for voting the way they want you to vote. And that's why I'm proud that I'm an independent candidate without a constituency per se of a PAC or a group or whatever the case may be, because I can make decisions independently when it comes to budgeting, services, etc. And I think that's important that we have that in our leadership structure. And so we have to do everything we can to avoid increasing taxes as well. So those partnerships are critical, and having individuals in place with the knowledge on how to write the grants, on how to utilizing the resources of our college students and our graduate students and interns, etc., can help us mitigate some of the costs so we're not paying someone an outlandish salary to manage our city or in a certain leadership role while other people are struggling to make ends meet and they're doing the work of the city. So overall, I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at what could be 10 years from now, and making sure that even if we you know, with our budget, that we're able to have sufficient funding to address the needs of the least of these, but at the same time, raise money and increase our economy.
Okay. So, you know, smoothly transitioning, keeping finances in mind, and talking about what we could use those funds better for, talk about public services. So when it comes to financial issues, what are people in Tallahassee struggling with right now? When we had our community forum, the biggest thing was, and we've been hearing this for years, is housing, as you all have brought up today. So how could the city improve the lives of struggling citizens, especially when it comes to housing and transportation? And we'll start with Commissioner Porter.
So, some of this I've mentioned. I mean, I'll tell you what I struggle with personally, you know, and I have a stable job and I don't have kids to provide for, you know, I'm in relatively good health, and I struggle to make ends meet and save appropriately with just the cost of basic services. And so that being said, I cannot imagine what other people are going through who contact my office on a daily basis, who are working 2 or 3 jobs, who are doing everything that we expect them to do, and simply, I mean, there are people paying to be on waiting lists for like mediocre housing apartments. It's just absolutely insane. And there is no excuse for the city not to invest directly in building more units. Some of these things wouldn't even require more money. It would just require us making it an easier regulatory environment for us to incentivize infill development, ADUs, middle housing like triplexes, duplexes, and different, community co-ops, land trusts. There's a lot of alternatives that we can consider that would increase the housing stock, increase protections, and funding resources as well. That I fully support. Whether we hear a lot about, it's not listed here, but our food deserts and the cost of that. I mean, food is as essential, if not more, than housing. I mean, you will literally die without food. And there are cities that are Republican cities in Florida who are opening publicly owned and operated grocery stores. That might not be the first thing that a city wants to do, but if there's a problem, the public sector's job is to step in and fix it. And that is something that I would support. Whether it's transportation, in the short term, investing in our Star Metro, making sure that it's reliable, that it is affordable, that it's connecting people with where they want to go, and in the long term, developing in a way that makes our city more walkable, more safe for pedestrians and cyclists. All of these things make a huge difference. The cost of owning a car right now has exploded. Even for people who can afford it, they don't want to. I mean, do we want to live in a world where we don't have freedom of movement, where unless you're 16 years old or, 80 years old and have $20,000 a year to blow on gas and insurance, you don't get to go anywhere? I mean, that's insane. And so I think those are the things that I struggle with on a daily basis, living what is, I would say, a relatively privileged life, and what other people in our community are struggling with as well. And unfortunately, those are the issues that the city of Tallahassee in our budget and in our decision making is addressing the least, and with the least urgency and with the least funding. And they are not, I will say, problems that do not have solutions. They do have solutions. It might not fix every problem that we have, but we see it in other cities where they're addressing these crises and where people are able to live more comfortable, healthy, whole lives, where crime is down, where life expectancy is up. I mean, these are not new problems. We know there are solutions, and we need the political will and courage to address them, and I believe they can be addressed.
I think that, again, affordable is based off of, affordability is in the eyes of the beholder, right? Because again, you can be making $100,000, but if you have children and you don't have certain, you might have health needs, etc., that easily can make living unaffordable. So it's really based off of how much you're bringing in. And unfortunately, you find even with college education these days, you have individuals that are struggling to make ends meet. That's why financial literacy and financial education is so critical to our, from high school on, make sure individuals understand the effects of finance. But even if people are good with their money, they have to, depending on what they're doing for a living, it might be their passion, but their passion may not necessarily pay the most and make things comfortable for them. So I think the issue with having affordable housing that matches the living wage, the median living wage of the community is important. And again, if you're making these deals with these developers, at least make it in the sense where people who need affordable housing can get a piece of the pie as well. I also think that the citizens don't have a say in what's coming in their community. The south side of town, we know that there's been a lot of complaints about recently. I was running around the community and I saw that the CVS is being replaced with a liquor store. Who is approving that? And why is it not being considered, hey, what does this community need? And it pains me when I go to community meeting after community meeting, and the elders, who are mostly part of the body that is there, are concerned and don't feel like their voice is being heard in regards to who's dumping in their community and why this business is being built here and why is a supermarket not being built and things that they need. it is because we don't own enough land as a city, and private individuals own, certain agencies own a good sector of the large swaths of land, and they do what they want to do with it, you know, as long as they get the permitting. And so I think if we don't have a greater say in what is coming and what's being built, you're going to continue to find those food deserts. People are going to continue to build on the northeast side of town where they feel the money is, and certain people on the west and the south side are going to continue to be sent the message that you're not worth it. Wells Fargo said, you're not worth it. We're closing this bank here instead of closing a bank in an area where people can easily access this bank down in the south side. They're saying, you are not worth it. CBS, you're not worth it. Winn-Dixie, you're not worth it. And I understand the economy and everything like that, but there's decisions that are being made to close down in certain areas, and there's nobody standing up and saying, stop, you know, let's try to negotiate this. When you guys get notice that this is going to be built here, let's make sure the people that live there actually want it and it's actually need. Because I guarantee you, Wells Fargo, there's nothing that's stopping a payday loan place or one of the smoke shop from being built in that space. All right, and if we don't have individuals who will stand up and say, no, enough is enough, we need things that people need in these spaces, then we're going to continue to find our citizens struggling.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. So when it comes to financial issues, what are people in Tallahassee are struggling with? Housing, transportation, food. So how could the city improve the lives of struggling citizens, especially when it comes to issues like affordable housing and transportation?
First of all, the city has 7 people in the executive management office earning $250,000 annually or more, making decisions for people, elderly who are on Social Security, fixed incomes, and people who are making minimum wage at a fast food restaurant who don't relate to what real people are going through in the community. First of all, they get a grant every year from the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund. And that grant requires a larger percentage of that money be spent for home ownership. And even though Mr. Gilbert talked about people who may earn $100,000 who still need housing and their needs met, when I look at the Schimberg data, which is the institute that collects data on affordable housing statewide, the big crisis they identified in Tallahassee for affordable housing is affordable rental. We have some of the highest rental rates in Tallahassee that compete all over Florida. And at least 20% of the population here is living at poverty level. That means that all of those people are housing overburdened, and the city spends most of its money creating workforce housing ownership for people who earn at 80 to 140% of the area median income, when the need is for people who earn 30 to 50% of the area median income, and yet the city turned down every plea from the Capital Area Justice Ministry to concentrate some of its budget on incentives for affordable rental housing. and to tell you how out of sync they are, out of touch. When they gave this huge subsidy to Amazon to locate here, and I feel it's good to have Amazon because we need those non-college jobs for people who need to earn good pay, a livable wage. But the people negotiating with Amazon did not even take into consideration that Amazon is going to be located way out by I-10. They didn't work out anything for Star Metro to provide transportation out to Amazon so the people who really need the jobs could get to the jobs. And that's some of the short-sightedness that I see in City Hall by people who can't relate to the folks who really have the needs.
So for our final topic of discussion, we are going to speak about Palestine. So Tallahassee Community Action Committee recognizes that all struggles are connected. So we're going to zoom out to probably the largest international issue going on right now. So in April, 5 Tallahassee community members were arrested for protesting for an end to the genocide in Palestine and for FSU to divulge and divest from any of its contracts with weapons manufacturers such as Boeing. With over 100 cities around the country having committed to at least a ceasefire and supporting an end to U.S. aid to Israel, do you support an end to the occupation and genocide of Palestinians and the fight for FSU to divulge and divest from weapons contractors such as Boeing? And would you vote in favor of a resolution supporting an end to U.S. aid to Israel and a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire in Gaza? So we'll start with Mr. Doe.
So this is a very complex issue. Yes, I would support the end of ceasefire. I hate that this conflict even started to begin with, but when people are oppressed, when they feel backed into a corner, even Martin Luther King said, rioting is the language of the oppressed, right? So while I don't advocate for the killing of innocent lives, I am I very much, I don't say I'm anti-war, but at all costs we should avoid moving into that direction. And we in the United States, we have our own issues as well financially that we can be looking at as well. So giving billions of dollars of aid to Israel, and I have friends on both sides of the spectrum, very close friends, and both are very passionate about this issue. However, it doesn't enough. I mean, how much more do you need to do to defend yourself? I think that issues regarding oppression are very real. The issues that Palestinians are feeling are very real. And when you are operating from a degree of privilege, you will look at it as if, you will look at it differently. And I think the Israelis, the way they're going about handling the situation is very irresponsible. Again, not saying that people have a right to defend themselves. I'm saying, when is enough enough? Why is there continuous effort to take over and kill and continue to shed innocent lives? When is this going to end? And when? And we've called for a ceasefire. I mean, and people they're not listening. And at some point in time, when people don't listen to you, even if they're your ally, this is something that we have to understand in politics. Even if they're your ally, you have to cut ties. You are now affecting what's going over there is drastically affecting the United States of America negatively. It's causing conflict for us here in our own home. And so when you don't listen, then as a result, you have to get cut off. And that's regardless of whoever is in charge, whoever has the power. We have to make sure that people understand that if you're affecting our livelihood here drastically, we have to take care of our citizens in the United States, particularly those who are connected to those communities as well. So it pains me to see what's going on, and then it continues to go on, and there has not been an end to it.
First of all, I support the end to the occupation and genocide. I support a resolution supporting the end of U.S. aid to Israel if they do not agree to a ceasefire. We cannot continue to be a co-conspirator to the murder of innocents. And, but as a city commissioner, my support for those things would mean very much, because this is a national, international issue. And the vote of city commissioners can't stop it. However, divestiture is a real avenue. I was the leader in divesting the city's pension funds from South African businesses that were doing business in South Africa at a time when most of the city commission was against it. And with the help of citizens in the community who were convinced after many meetings where I spoke out against it, it happened. And that is something that can be looked at now. There was a New York Times newspaper article that pictured me, Dr. Hollyfield, and Melanie Johnson, who were at the forefront of that fight, in an article about divesting from South Africa during those horrible times. And I think those are the kind of methods that have to be used that would have meaning right now.
I agree. I absolutely support a ceasefire. I denounce the displacement of Palestinians. I joined with hundreds of elected officials across the country in writing a letter to President Biden saying as much. And I opposed the arrest of the peaceful protesters at FSU. I absolutely believe have those charges been dropped?
They just reached a diversion deal.
Okay, so not really.
So
no. I absolutely support the call on the city and FSU to divest from defense contractors and all financial interests that do not align with our community values. When I was at FSU, I was involved and a founding member of Uncook My Campus that called on FSU to divest from all undue donor influence. And led the charge to get Airmark taken off of campus, even though I believe they're back. So absolutely, I support that. I think Netanyahu has to be stopped. The international community has been incredibly clear on the fact that the state of Israel is committing war crimes, and and I am disgusted by the fact that my tax dollars are being used to support that, and I feel complicit in that as a result. So I'm supportive.
All right, well, that brings us to an end of discussion. We do have a couple more minutes just to.
Could I, my husband husband, Reverend Lee Johnson, just came in,
Okay.
and that reminded me of something he told me before I left the house, which is that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee lost her battle with cancer and passed today. And I wanted to ask for a moment of silence for her.
Amen.
So, we do have just a couple minutes left. If anyone has something they'd like to close with before we get out, now we have time. Otherwise, thank everybody for being here. Anybody have anything like that?
Well, I would like to say, again, as a kind of a newcomer on the block, you know, my passion for serving Tallahassee, reason I'm running, even though I align with the viewpoints of the current, some of the viewpoints of the current commissioner, even some of the viewpoints of my other opponent, I believe that there needs to be a greater balance in our city commission. There's a stability issue in which I feel the mayor should be more of a tiebreaker, to be honest with you, rather than on one side or the other, but that's another discussion. But, you know, there's a lot of needs within our community, and sometimes I feel like we haven't even touched the surface because of the hot button issues that are popular and what people hear. You know, and even when it comes to reporting, you know, my name has been eliminated a lot of times, you know, when it comes to talking about the candidates. And I'm not bothered by that, because I'm going to continue to speak out and to use my voice in whatever way I can. But I think we need to really look at how we are influenced as city commissioners, and making sure that when we operate with as an independent voice as possible, while being aligned with certain individuals and their beliefs. I do believe that ultimately our city commission has to make decisions for all people in this community, and so I believe that I am the best representative of that, and I hope that I can gain your support on August 20th, or if you vote early. August 10th.
Sure, I'm Commissioner Jack Porter. Thank you for hosting this forum and for your advocacy in the community. And I am proud of my record representing the people of Tallahassee, and I believe that I do provide independent leadership. I have not accepted money from anyone who has a financial interest in the decisions that we make at the city commission level, and I believe that that is critical to the independence that we have as elected officials. And I believe that we can achieve the goals that we have and have these real discussions at the city commission level with a change of leadership and with continued involvement and pressure on our leadership. We've talked a lot about accountability today, and that is true across the board of our police chief, of our city manager, of me, and of all of our elected officials. And I look forward to continuing to represent you, to work with you on these issues, and I hope that I can earn your vote on August 20th.
Johnson?
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation to come today. My final comments are on the ballot initiative. I will not vote in favor of doubling city commissioners' salaries. It is ridiculous that they would put that on the ballot at the same time that they were refusing to pay firefighters a mere 5% increase that all other city employees received in this fiscal year. I will not vote to support that. And I will vote for stronger ethics, that section of the charter amendments that will be on the ballot, because that's the only way we will be able to hold the people accountable that we've been talking about here today. And I think it's abhorrent that Commissioner Curtis Richardson chose not to be here today. He is a two-term city commissioner. He is putting himself out for re-election, and city commission positions are at large, meaning you should be putting yourself out to listen to, hear, represent all citizens of the community, and that he thought that this event was not worthy of his attendance kind of tells you where he is. And I see my role as speaking to bringing about understanding and listening to all of the citizens of Tallahassee. And I ask for your vote on August 20th.
And for the record, was Pastor Ferguson responsive to your request?
No. The folks who are here with us today, Bernard Stevens was going to join us, but he had a flight issue that prevented him from being here. But outside of him, the three of you, the four of you are the only ones who responded to the request. Okay, well, with that being said, thanks again to all of you for joining us today. On behalf of TCAC, I just want to express my gratitude to showing up today and listening to and discussing the causes that so many working class communities around our city care about, and doing your utmost to speak to them.